My beloved child. Stop for a moment. Do not rush past this message, because something has shifted behind the scenes, something you could not see, something that was happening quietly while you were trying to convince yourself that nothing was happening at all. There are moments when heaven allows a hidden truth to remain hidden for a season, not because you were forgotten, but because the truth needed time to reach the surface without destroying what your heart was still learning to understand. And this is one of those moments. You have wondered why the silence felt different lately. You have wondered why a certain person could disappear, remain distant, act as though they had moved on, and yet somehow still seem emotionally present in your life. You have questioned the strange feeling that something remained unfinished between you. You tried to reason with yourself. You told yourself that perhaps you were imagining things. Perhaps you cared more than they did. Perhaps the connection meant something only to you. But there is something you were never told. There was someone close to your soulmate who knew more than you realized. Someone they trusted. Someone who heard conversations you were never present for. Someone who saw the hesitation behind their confidence, the sadness behind their silence, the questions behind the decisions they pretended were final. And recently, that person could no longer keep the truth hidden. What they revealed changed everything. Pause here and breathe, because the first thing you need to understand is this: what was exposed was not simply a secret about another person. It was a secret about what your soulmate has been carrying inside themselves. For longer than you know, they have been fighting a private battle between what they feel and what they believe they are supposed to do. They may have looked calm. They may have appeared unaffected. They may have continued their routine, spoken to people, smiled, worked, laughed, posted things, or acted as if life was moving forward normally. But appearances were not telling you the whole story. There were moments when your name entered their mind without permission. There were moments when an ordinary place suddenly reminded them of you. A song. A street. A familiar time of night. A message they never sent. A memory they thought they had buried. And there was one person who noticed. That person noticed the change in their voice whenever you were mentioned. They noticed how quickly your soulmate changed the subject. They noticed the silence that followed. They noticed that your soulmate could talk about almost anything, but when the conversation came close to you, something inside them became guarded. And eventually, this trusted person asked a question your soulmate had been avoiding. Do you still love them? Your soulmate did not answer immediately. That silence said more than words could have said. Because sometimes the truth does not enter a room through a confession. Sometimes it enters through hesitation. Sometimes it enters through lowered eyes. Sometimes it enters through a breath that lasts a second too long. And that person saw it. They saw the answer before your soulmate ever spoke it. You may have been wondering why things became so confusing. Why there was distance followed by signs. Why there was silence followed by unexpected attention. Why you could feel as though something was unfinished even when everything seemed finished on the surface. You were not given the complete picture. And now, piece by piece, the picture is beginning to emerge. But listen carefully, because this is where the story becomes deeper. The person who exposed everything did not do it because they wanted to hurt your soulmate. They did it because they became tired of watching someone carry a truth that was slowly becoming too heavy. They had watched your soulmate struggle. They had listened to the excuses. They had heard the explanations. They had heard your soulmate say things like, "It is complicated." They had heard, "I do not know what I am supposed to do." They had heard, "Maybe it is better this way." But beneath every explanation was another sentence that your soulmate could not bring themselves to say. "I still care." And beneath that sentence was an even deeper one. "I never really stopped." That is the part they tried to hide. Not only from you. From themselves. My child, there are people who can walk away physically while remaining emotionally attached to a memory. There are people who can create distance while secretly wishing the distance would disappear. There are people who convince themselves that letting someone go is the mature thing to do, only to discover months later that their heart never agreed with the decision. Your soulmate may have tried to become comfortable with the absence of you. They may have told themselves that time would erase the connection. They may have believed that if they stayed busy enough, distracted enough, surrounded enough, they would eventually stop remembering. But the heart does not always obey the plans of the mind. And the trusted person saw that contradiction. They saw your soulmate moving through life while carrying an invisible conversation with you. A conversation that never happened out loud. A conversation filled with everything they wished they had said. Everything they wished they had explained. Everything they wished they could take back. And then something happened. One night, your soulmate finally admitted something. Not everything. Just enough. Enough for the person they trusted to realize that this was not a passing memory. This was not nostalgia. This was not loneliness. This was not simply missing the past. There was still love underneath it. And that realization changed the way that trusted person looked at them. Because suddenly, every strange behavior made sense. Every time your soulmate checked their phone and put it down. Every time they almost reached out and stopped. Every time they asked indirectly about you. Every time they acted indifferent after hearing your name. Every time they became quiet when someone mentioned relationships. It all connected. And once the pieces connected, the truth became impossible to ignore. Your soulmate had not forgotten you. They had been trying to survive the fact that they had not forgotten you. There is a difference. A very important difference. Because forgetting someone is peaceful. Trying to forget someone is exhausting. And your soulmate was exhausted. They were tired of pretending. Tired of explaining. Tired of telling themselves that everything was fine. Tired of acting stronger than they felt. And perhaps the most painful part was that they did not know whether you still cared. That uncertainty became its own kind of prison. They wondered whether you had moved on. They wondered whether you hated them. They wondered whether you had forgiven them. They wondered whether you would even listen if they ever told you the truth. And the person they trusted knew all of this. That person had become the silent witness to a love story that your soulmate thought had ended. But something was about to happen that neither of them expected. The trusted person finally confronted them. Not gently this time. Not indirectly. They asked the question your soulmate had been avoiding. If you still love them, why are you acting like you don't? Silence. Again. But this time, your soulmate could not escape into another subject, they could not laugh it off. They could not blame circumstances. They could not say that it was complicated. Something inside them broke open. And they admitted the truth. They said they were afraid. Afraid that it was too late. Afraid that you had changed. Afraid that they had damaged something that could never be repaired. Afraid that if they came back, you would reject them. Afraid that if they stayed away, they would spend years wondering what could have happened, and then came the confession that shocked the person sitting across from them. Your soulmate admitted that they had imagined talking to you many times. They had imagined what they would say. They had imagined seeing you again. They had imagined hearing your voice. They had imagined the possibility of telling you everything. But every imagined reunion ended with the same fear. What if they don't want me anymore? My beloved child, sometimes the person who appears least affected is the one fighting the greatest internal battle. You saw distance. Heaven saw conflict. You saw silence, heaven saw hesitation. You saw someone moving forward. Heaven saw someone repeatedly looking backward. That does not mean every silence is a promise. It does not mean every thought becomes an action. It does not mean you should put your life on hold waiting for someone. No. Your life must continue. Your peace must continue. Your growth must continue. But this fictional message is revealing the emotional truth of a story where someone you thought had forgotten is beginning to confront what they buried. And that confrontation began with the one person they trusted most. The person who exposed everything. That person eventually told your soulmate something they did not want to hear. They said, in essence, you cannot keep pretending this does not matter. And your soulmate knew they were right. Because the truth had become too obvious. They could hide it from the world. They could hide it from you. They could even hide it from themselves for a while. But they could not hide it from the person who knew them deeply. That person had seen them before the walls were built. They knew what your soulmate looked like when they were genuinely happy. They knew what they looked like when they were pretending. And lately, they had noticed the difference. Something else was exposed. Your soulmate had not only spoken about you. They had spoken about the possibility of losing you permanently. And that conversation revealed just how deeply this had affected them. They wondered whether one day you would meet someone else. Someone who would appreciate you without hesitation. Someone who would give you the consistency they failed to give. Someone who would say the words they were too afraid to say. And the thought of that possibility hurt more than they admitted. Not because they believed they owned you. But because they realized they had been given something meaningful and did not know how to hold it. They realized that fear had influenced decisions that love should have influenced. They realized that pride had spoken when vulnerability was needed. They realized that silence had created wounds that honesty might have prevented. And now they were facing the consequences. The trusted person told them something else. You keep saying you don't know what to do, but you know what you feel. That sentence stayed with your soulmate. Because it was true. They did know what they felt. What they did not know was whether they were brave enough to act on it. And this is where the hidden story becomes even more emotional. Your soulmate remembered a moment between you. A small moment. Perhaps you do not even remember it the way they do. Maybe it was a look. A conversation. A simple sentence. A moment when they felt understood without having to explain themselves. They remembered how safe it felt. How rare it was. And they realized that what they had been searching for afterward had never quite felt the same. That realization frightened them. Because it meant the connection had mattered more than they wanted to admit. They had tried to replace the feeling. They had tried to rationalize it. They had tried to convince themselves that what happened between you was simply a chapter. But some chapters leave fingerprints on the heart. And yours did. The trusted person knew this. They had heard the story too many times. They had heard your name in conversations where your name supposedly did not belong. They had watched your soulmate become emotional over memories they claimed no longer mattered. Eventually, the trusted person realized something. Your soulmate was not waiting for the past. They were waiting for courage. And that distinction changed everything. Because waiting for the past means wanting something that cannot return. Waiting for courage means knowing something could still be possible but being afraid to reach for it. Your soulmate had been standing between those two worlds. And now, the secret had been exposed. But you need to understand something else. The person who exposed everything may not have told you directly. They may have spoken to someone else. They may have revealed something during a conversation. They may have confronted your soulmate. They may have said a sentence that was never meant to travel any further. Yet somehow, the truth began moving. Like a door opening in a room where everyone thought the walls were solid. And suddenly, things that had seemed unrelated started making sense. The change in behavior. The strange timing. The emotional distance. The unexpected curiosity. The silence. The almost contact. The hesitation. The feeling that something had shifted. Again, this is not a command to chase signs. Do not build your life around coincidences. Do not abandon your peace for a prediction. The purpose of this fictional story is not to tell you that you must wait. It is to remind you that people often carry emotions they never reveal, and sometimes the truth emerges through the one person they trusted enough to hear it. And that person had finally reached their limit. They asked your soulmate another question. If you had one chance to tell them the truth, what would you say? Your soulmate became quiet. Longer this time. Then they began. They said they were sorry. Not the easy kind of sorry. Not the kind people say to end an argument. The deep kind. The kind that comes when someone finally understands the effect of their choices. They were sorry for the confusion. Sorry for the distance. Sorry for the moments when you needed clarity and received silence. Sorry for the things they said out of fear. Sorry for the things they never said because of pride. And then they said something even more vulnerable. I wish they knew I never stopped caring. The trusted person looked at them. And your soulmate continued. I wish they knew that sometimes I stayed away because I thought staying away was better for them. But then came the contradiction. I don't know if it was actually better. My child, there are people who leave because they do not love you. And there are people who leave because they believe they are incapable of giving you what you deserve. Those stories are not the same. The first is detachment. The second can be fear. And fear can look remarkably similar to rejection from the outside. That is why you were confused. You were judging the visible behavior while they were living the invisible conflict. But now, the trusted person knew. They knew that beneath the distance was unresolved emotion. And once they knew, they refused to allow your soulmate to keep hiding behind excuses. They told them that if they truly wanted peace, they had to stop running from the truth. Not necessarily by returning to you. Not necessarily by demanding another chance. But by finally being honest with themselves. That was the beginning of something. Because your soulmate went home that night carrying a truth they could no longer unlearn. They looked at their phone. Your conversation was still there. Maybe old messages. Maybe a name. Maybe a photograph. Maybe nothing at all. But the emptiness itself became meaningful. They stared at the screen. Their finger hovered. They thought about typing. They thought about deleting everything. They thought about pretending again. And then they remembered the trusted person's words. You know what you feel. That sentence echoed. Again. And again. And again. Then something unexpected happened. Your soulmate began writing a message. Not sending it. Just writing. They typed what they wished they could say. They admitted the things they had hidden. They admitted they still thought about you. They admitted they had been afraid. They admitted that part of them had hoped you might somehow reach out first because they did not know whether they had the right to return. They admitted that they missed you. Then they stopped. Deleted it. Started again. Stopped. Deleted it again. Because writing the truth was easier than sending it. Sending it would make the truth real. And that frightened them. But here is what the trusted person did not know yet. There was another secret. Something your soulmate had never told anyone. Not even the person they trusted most. Something connected to the final days before you separated. Something they had seen. Something they had misunderstood. Something that changed the decision they made. And this hidden detail was the reason your soulmate's guilt ran deeper than you realized. The trusted person had exposed almost everything. Almost. Because there was still one truth your soulmate had kept locked away. And that truth was about the moment they first realized they might actually lose you. They remembered a specific day. A specific conversation. A specific feeling. They remembered seeing you differently. Not as someone who would always be there. But as someone who could eventually walk away. And that realization terrified them. Instead of moving closer, they pulled away. Instead of saying, "I'm scared of losing you," they acted as though they did not care. Instead of admitting vulnerability, they became distant. Instead of asking for reassurance, they created confusion. And then they watched you respond to the distance. They saw you becoming quieter. They saw you protecting your heart. And somewhere inside, they knew they were causing the very loss they feared. But they did not know how to stop it. Pride had already taken control. Fear had already become a habit. And by the time they understood what was happening, the space between you had become too large. That is why the trusted person's revelation mattered so much. It forced your soulmate to look directly at the truth. Not the version they told others. Not the version they told themselves. The real version. They cared. They were afraid. They regretted things. And they had never completely closed the door. My beloved child, there is something powerful about realizing that the person you thought was indifferent may have been struggling in silence. But there is something even more powerful. You do not need their confession to validate your worth. You do not need their return to prove that you were loved. You do not need someone else's regret to confirm that your heart mattered. You were valuable before they realized it. You were worthy before they missed you. You were deserving before they understood what they had lost. And if this story resonates with you, let that truth settle deeply. Because the next revelation is not about whether your soulmate still has feelings. The trusted person already discovered that. The next revelation is about what your soulmate intends.